No one knew. No one suspected. It was just a kiss hidden among the smell of soap and clean sheets. But in that moment, among baskets of clothes and machines vibrating, she gave everything. Her eyes, her dreams, her courage. And him? He kissed her as if it were the last time, and it was. The next morning he walked right past. He lowered his eyes. He pretended not to see. He pretended not to feel. He pretended not to remember. And her? She smiled in pain, straightened her apron, and promised herself that even with her heart torn, she would never turn back for anyone who didn't have the courage to take her in the light of day. And so began the loudest silence of Clara's life. While he boarded private jets, toasted with champagne, and smiled on the covers of magazines, she continued on, stepping between buckets and squeegees, her eyes filled with something that no one else could understand. The taste of a silent love, of a kiss that marked her like a red-hot iron, and of a shame that was not hers. Because those who are ashamed of true love end up being haunted by it when everything else falls apart. And what seemed buried in the laundry room of a luxury hotel would one day return. It would return when he least expected it. And this time, there would be no way to lower her eyes. If this story has already caught your attention in the first few seconds, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It makes all the difference in helping more people find stories like this. Losing. Her father as a child taught Clara to love in silence. Growing up with her sick mother, folding sheets to pay the rent, and dividing her bread between medicines and promises, made her a strong woman, with sweet eyes but calloused hands. Her world was the laundry room of a luxurious hotel in Miami, where the sheets smelled of French roses and the guests asked for silence as if they were asking for respect. Clara knew how to move without making a sound. She knew how to fold with precision, hide her sadness between the folds of pillowcases, and smile with her eyes lowered. Sometimes she took a second longer with the formal clothes. She looked at the expensive fabrics with a twinge of curiosity, but soon returned to work, as if that world of satin and shine had nothing to do with her. Until he showed up. Ethan, the owner's son. Tailored suit, Italian shoes, well-groomed beard, restless gaze. He walked the halls as if he had been born there, and looked at everyone with a kind of bored haste, except for Clara. With her there was a hesitation in his gaze, a curious respect, a kind of silence that made noise. Their first encounter was quick. She bumped into him at the door of the laundry room, with a heavy basket in her hands. He held the door but said nothing. He just stared. Too long, too deep. And Clara lowered her eyes, swallowing her heart. From that day on he began to appear more, always nearby, for no apparent reason. He would sit near the lobby when she passed by with the laundry carts. He would ask for extra towels with silly excuses. He even purposely dropped an expensive shirt, just to see if she would bend down. But Clara never gave him what he expected. She kept her posture, even with her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't innocent. She knew the game. She knew the risk. She knew that in that world laundries were invisible, and so were the women who inhabited them. But all it took was a storm for the world to turn upside down. That night, the power went out. The hotel went into emergency mode. And there he was, standing at the door of the laundry room, looking at Clara under the red emergency light, as if he saw something that even he couldn't name. She tried to ignore it. She kept turning, but he got closer, and it was there, between the smell of fabric softener and fear, that the kiss happened. A kiss that didn't ask permission, that didn't ask about social class, that didn't warn of the consequences. And then, everything changed. Clara arrived at work early the next day. Her eyes burned from a night of almost no sleep, and her heart still throbbed with echoes of what shouldn't have happened. She put on her uniform slowly, trying to convince herself that it hadn't been real. But the taste of the kiss was still there, like a secret burning her lips. She wasn't expecting flowers or promises. She just wanted him to look into her eyes like he had before, to say something, a word, a nod, But Ethan walked right past her in the hallway. He wore a different suit, a different perfume, a different expression. The same face, but now cold, professional, a stranger. She stopped for a second, as if time had caught up with her feet. He pretended not to see her. He walked past her like someone walking through a wall. And that hurt more than any slap. Because it wasn't just the rejection, it was the shame. It was the fear that it was all just a game to him. A whim. Clara headed for the laundry room with shaking hands. He tried to concentrate on the noise of the machines, the smell of the soaps, the service lists. But something had been torn inside him. With each passing hour, he continued to wander around the hotel like a prince in his castle. He laughed with the managers, joked with the waiters, greeted guests with his easy charm. But whenever he passed Clara, he looked away. Sometimes he even hesitated for a moment, as if he wanted to speak, as if he wanted to break the silence. But he didn't. And that was worse than any lie. At lunch, Clara ate alone, her head down. At the back door, she heard two chambermaids whispering about Ethan. He's engaged to a model, rich, famous, one of those who never wears the same outfit again. The sentence fell over her like ice water. So that was it. The kiss had been a mistake, an impulse, maybe a test, and she had been foolish enough to believe there was more to it. That night, when she returned home, she found her mother coughing more than usual. He made tea, made the bed, and took care of her with the same silent eyes as always. But inside, Clara was empty. That same week, Ethan stopped appearing in the hallways. It was known that he had traveled to New York. Meetings, appointments, futures too important for dry cleaners. And even far away, he was still there, in Clara's hands when they touched fabric similar to those of the shirt he was wearing, in the sound of the rain, which seemed to repeat that moment like a perverse echo. But she decided. She would no longer cry for those who had embarrassed her, and she would not wait for those who did not have the courage to recognize her. It was in this silent pain that Clara began to change. Not suddenly, but in small gestures, in the way she looked at herself in the mirror, in the care she took with her tied hair, in the words she stopped swallowing. What Ethan did not know is that by remaining silent in front of her, he had awakened something much greater than he himself would be able to bear. The weeks passed like cold waves, and Clara learned to swim in them without drowning. Her eyes no longer sought Ethan in the hallways, although her heart, a traitor, sometimes tightened for no reason. She focused on her work with an almost religious intensity. The sheets were aligned like promises, the towels folded firmly, and the washed clothes now carried a more confident gesture, as if each fold were an affirmation that she was still there, whole, dignified, strong. But inside, the absence still weighed, not because of longing, but because of the way everything was silenced, by the kiss without an answer, by the goodbye that never came. It was on a random Wednesday that everything started to stir again. The hotel was hosting an exclusive event, and Ethan returned. No one announced it, but everyone felt it. It was as if the air around them had changed. He walked past the reception desk, accompanied by two foreign businessmen, and Clara caught a glimpse of his reflection in the glass of the laundry room. The same confident walk, the same distracted elegance. But there was something different about his face. Tiredness, perhaps, or the shadow of what had been left behind. When his eyes touched hers for a split second, Clara did not look away. For the first time, she held his gaze. And it was Ethan who lowered his eyes. In the following days, he began to circulate through the same places again. Sometimes he would stop near the laundry room for some excuse. Other times, he would order something at the restaurant and glance discreetly in the direction of the employee corridor. Clara noticed, but did not react. Her gestures remained precise, her posture unshakable. This disconcerted him. He was used to women who smiled, who begged, who bowed before his attention. But Clara was different. She did not beg. And this silence, this pure pride, began to haunt his thoughts. One afternoon, Clara was leaving a cart with clean clothes on the executive floor when she heard hurried footsteps behind her. It was him. He said her name as if the word carried weight. She turned around slowly. Ethan seemed less confident than usual. He tried to explain that he had traveled in a hurry, that his life was complicated, that none of that should have happened, but that he couldn't forget her. Clara just listened, not giving an inch. In the end, he asked if they could talk after work. She thought, took a deep breath, and replied, "Now you want to talk? After you treated me like I was invisible? You don't need to explain anything to me. I understood everything with your silence." And she walked away. Her response hit him harder than any scream. In the days that followed, he insisted. Small gestures, notes left, a timid apology delivered by a manager. But Clara didn't respond. Not out of revenge, but because she understood that those who are ashamed of sincere love are not ready for what she has to offer. What Ethan didn't know yet is that her silence would be the mirror, in which he would have to look at himself when everything he had began to fall apart. That night, the rain came back with a vengeance. The sky seemed to repeat the scene from the night of the kiss, as if it wanted to test if there was still anything left between them. The hotel was busy, with receptionists running around, nervous waiters, and a luxurious perfume mixed with the muffled sound of important conversations. Clara was getting off the elevator with a pile of towels when she heard his voice again. Not the soft voice of before, but firm, determined, almost desperate. "Clara, please." She froze. The hallways were empty. He approached slowly, with a tired look, the sunken eyes of someone who hadn't slept well in days. "Can you listen to me for just a minute?" She hesitated, holding the towels as if they were a shield. But eyes don't lie. And behind the hardness, there was still an open scar. He saw it. Ethan stepped forward and said that things were getting out of control in his life. His fiancée, his father, his business. He said that kiss was the only moment in months that he felt alive, that he ran away because he was afraid, that his silence was cowardice, yes, but also confusion. He confessed to her like a man devoid of pride. Clara, for a few seconds, wanted to believe him. She wanted to see on his face the same man from the laundromat, with the sweet look before the kiss. But something inside her stopped her from taking that step. She remembered the pain, the abandonment. How many times she had been ignored while he smiled for the cameras and rings. "Are you sorry because you lost me? Or because everything else is falling apart?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Ethan didn't answer, and she, firm, turned her back. The next day, the board announced the arrival of Ethan's fiancée at the hotel. A grand event would be held in her honor, and Clara was instructed to prepare the linens for the presidential suite. Ironic. She would be the one to take care of the bed linens where the two would celebrate their love. But Clara didn't waver. She washed, ironed, and folded them with the same precision as always. When she handed over the linens, she passed the fiancé in the hallway, a tall, cold woman who looked her up and down as if she were checking for a stain. The pain hit, but it didn't go away. Clara didn't break so easily anymore. During the party, Clara was assigned to be on standby in the laundry room, but at 10 p.m., an emergency occurred. A torn dress. The manager asked Clara to go upstairs to fix the fabric. When she entered the suite, she found the bride sitting in front of the mirror, and Ethan, standing next to the window, motionless. He saw her in the reflection. Their eyes met. Clara took a deep breath, picked up the dress, and did her job. Silently, precisely, professionally. The bride, with contempt, said something out loud. "It's good to know that even past mistakes serve some purpose." Clara finished, handed over the dress, and left without saying a word. But on the service stairs, the tears came. Not of sadness, but of indignation. It was the last tear, the last weakness, the last time she would allow someone to extinguish the light inside her. From then on, what would be born would be something else, something that neither love nor humiliation would be able to control. The next morning, Clara woke up different. as if the silence of the previous night had lit a new spark in her soul. The taste of humiliation was still there, bitter, but it didn't hurt like before. It was as if she had crossed a bridge and, on the other side, something was waiting. At the hotel, the routine continued, but Clara no longer belonged there as she had before. Her eyes saw everything through a different lens. Luxury no longer hypnotized her. The marble corridors no longer intimidated her. And Ethan was now just the name of a lesson. But fate sometimes has cruel plans to test us. On Tuesday afternoon, a rumor began to spread among the employees. A necklace had disappeared from the presidential suite. A very expensive necklace belonging to Ethan's fiancée. The cameras showed nothing. The security guards were discreetly searching. And, late in the afternoon, Clara was called to the manager's office, alone, nervous. There were the manager, 2 security guards, and the fiancée herself, cold as a blade. She was the only person who came into the room in the last few hours, the woman said, looking directly at Clara, as if she was already certain of her guilt. Clara, shocked, tried to defend herself, but her voice found no place in the heavy air of the room. The manager explained that, by default, they would need to search her belongings. She opened her purse, her locker, she allowed everything, nothing was found. But the shadow of the accusation was already cast, and that was enough. The next day, she was dismissed. For security reasons, they said, nothing personal. But for Clara, it was all personal. It was the weight of being invisible, of not having a last name to call out for her, of having loved a man who now watched everything from afar without lifting a finger. Because yes, Ethan knew. He knew everything, and he kept quiet. Clara left the hotel through the back door, with her simple backpack on her back and her eyes wet. She wasn't crying because of the injustice. She was crying because of the confirmation of something she already knew deep down. She had never been on the inside. She had always been on the outside, even when he kissed her. On the bus, with her head resting against the window, she saw the reflection of the city passing by quickly. And there, between one sigh and the next, she promised herself that this wasn't the end, that she wouldn't be remembered as the girl from the laundry, that one day, her name would be spoken with respect, and that he would hear that name, even if it was too late. The following week, Clara got a new, much simpler job at a local laundromat. It was smaller, no frills with peeling walls and a strong smell of bleach. But there was something there that the hotel never gave her. Peace. No one looked down on her. No one blamed her. She could just be Clara. Over time, she began to sew a few pieces in her spare time, small adjustments for her neighbors, simple repairs. She discovered that her hands knew more than how to fold sheets. They knew how to create, to shape. And little by little, an idea began to emerge. A small, timid idea, but one that shone within her like a distant beacon. Nights in her new reality had a different rhythm. Clara arrived home tired, but there was a seed germinating in her chest. Every time she finished an adjustment and the client smiled in front of the mirror with her new clothes, she felt a kind of healing, as if each invisible stitch you sewed also mended something in you. In that simple laundromat, with its noisy machines and soap-stained uniforms, she finally began to listen to herself. There were no luxurious mirrors, but there was truth. And in the silence of the iron, in the colored threads stored in glass jars, Clara rediscovered the woman that Ethan's kiss had almost erased. One night, an elegant lady dropped off an old dress to be washed. It was dark blue satin with details reminiscent of ancient times. When Clara saw it, she felt a shiver. It was the kind of piece she washed at the hotel but had never been allowed to touch freely. She asked permission to alter it. The owner said yes, as long as Clara respected the history of the dress. She spent hours studying the seams, redoing hems, delicately adding her own touch. On the day of delivery, the lady was silent for several seconds as she put it on. Then she said, "You have rare hands. This is not just a repair. It is art." And she paid double the price, leaving a card with her contact details. That sparked new courage. Clara began buying fabrics with what little she had left over. She used scraps, leftovers, donations. She set up a makeshift table in the corner of the laundry room near the window. In the early hours of the morning, when everyone was asleep, she would draw, test, make mistakes, and start over. With each piece she sewed, she felt more whole. The clothes stopped being just clothes. They became memories sewn into fabric. Scars transformed into elegance. She began discreetly posting on social media with the help of a friend. She created a name. Atelier is reborn. It was small but true. Clients began to appear. First neighbors, then acquaintances, and soon women who said, "I've heard about you." The pieces began to take shape, and with them, Clara did too. She no longer walked hunched over. She no longer lowered her eyes. With each finished dress, it seemed like another weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan was facing a different scenario. His marriage to the influencer had become a spectacle for the magazines. But inside, he was hollow. His fiancée demanded appearances, travel, business. His father, tired of the scandals, began to distance him from the company. Ethan saw his public image slowly crumble. The money continued, but something inside him felt broken. A guilt that slept next to him every night. And it was in this silent abyss that the name Atelier is Reborn came to him. First by chance, in a report about new talents in designer sewing. Then from a client who showed up wearing a dress that seemed made of soul. It's by a new designer. Her name is Clara. The name made time stand still. Ethan, who thought he had buried that past, felt the ground shake. Because the world turns. And what is invisible one day becomes a lighthouse. The hotel was preparing for the most anticipated event of the year. A charity event with celebrities, businessmen, and national media. Ethan's name was still strong in the circles of power, even if his image was starting to fade. The bride, now his wife, was, in the spotlight with the same coolness as always, and everything would be broadcast live on social media. While the spotlights were positioned in the gilded halls, Clara, on the other side of the city, was sewing the last button on a dress that carried more than fabric. It carried her story. She had been invited to present her creations in the new talent section of the charity show. An idea from one of the first clients who believed in her. I didn't know that the event was linked to Ethan's father's hotel chain. And even if I had known, I wouldn't have backed down. I was no longer running away from my own strength. On the night of the event, Clara arrived with the demeanor of someone who had overcome pain and learned to breathe again. She was wearing a simple piece of clothing made by her, but which made her look like a woman from an old story. Her eyes were calm, but firm. She walked among influential people as if that place belonged to her too. Because now it did. When he entered the room, glances turned. Not of pity, but of curiosity. There was something in his presence that silenced the superficial noise around. Ethan, who was walking among the guests, froze when he saw her. The glass in his hand trembled slightly, and the bride, noticing his fixed gaze, followed his lead and immediately recognized her. "Her?" she whispered, with disguised venom. Ethan didn't answer. Clara passed them by like time, serene, inevitable, without bowing. She was announced on stage as the young revelation who transforms scars into design. When she walked up the steps, the lights touched her skin with respect. The entire room fell silent. She said little. She just thanked him. She said that life is like a fabric. Even if it's stained, it can be embroidered again with dignity. Her words echoed more than any speech. Ethan heard each syllable as if they were needles. It was her, the same woman he had silenced, who he had avoided, who he had allowed to be humiliated. And now she was there in front of everyone, greater than the shame he had tried to hide. But Clara didn't look at him. Because forgiveness is sometimes silence, and the most elegant contempt is the absence of hurt in the eyes. As the applause rose, she walked off the stage with her head held high, without fear, without pain, without debt. It was her night. and no one else could steal that from her. In the days following the event, Clara's name began to circulate more strongly among fashion magazines, journalists and influencers who sought authenticity. There was something in her creations that touched people deeply. It wasn't just beauty, it was history, soul, and overcoming woven into every detail. Her small studio began to receive orders from outside the state. A fabric brand offered her a partnership, and for the first time, Clara saw her mother's face smile with pride, not only for her surviving, but for finally being alive. However, not everyone was ready to accept this new Clara. Ethan's wife, upon learning that her name was still linked to the foundation that promoted the fashion show, was furious. "She can't keep appearing at events linked to our image," she said, demanding action. She tried to use her influence to discredit the brand. She spread insinuations, but nothing stuck, because Clara was no longer a shadow. She was light. Ethan, on the other hand, was immersed in contradictions. The nights spent with the woman he had chosen became unbearable. The big house seemed like an expensive tomb. His business, once solid, began to crumble silently, not because of Clara, but because of the lack of commitment he had planted throughout his life. But now, everything that had previously distracted him was no longer enough. The trips lost their meaning. The toasts sounded false, and his eyes more and more sought that look that had the courage to face him without saying anything. Almost impulsively, Ethan went to the studio. He stood on the other side of the street, watching. He saw Clara laughing with a client, cleaning her mother's glasses, folding fabric with the same delicacy as someone tending to old wounds, but he didn't have the courage to go in. Standing there, in front of that simple door with the handwritten sign, he felt small. For the first time, he understood that he had lost something that no amount of money could ever recover. Clara noticed his presence. Not that day, but in the following days, when an anonymous envelope arrived with a handwritten apology, no signature, just 2 sentences. "I was weak. You were everything." She read it. She took a deep breath. She put the paper in the bottom drawer, along with other memories that no longer hurt. She no longer needed explanations or reconciliations. Time had already sown what it needed inside her, and it had embroidered a woman who knew who she was, with or without forgiveness. What Clara didn't know, yet, was that destiny, when well crafted, prepares surprises that not even the most skillful fingers can anticipate. Something was coming, a new invitation, a new stage, and this time, she would rise not as a revelation, but as a protagonist. It was early fall when Clara got the call. On the other end of the line, a curator from a renowned fashion event in Chicago said she had seen her creations in a small virtual gallery and wanted to invite her to an exclusive presentation. The proposal seemed like a distant dream. Paid flights, accommodation in a luxury hotel, her own space on the catwalk. For a moment, Clara thought it was a prank, but when she confirmed the details and signed the papers, she realized that fate was finally responding generously to the dignified silence with which she had endured the past. The trip was made with her mother. There was no exaggerated luxury, only dignity, comfort, and gratitude. Upon arriving in Chicago, Clara was welcomed as an artist. No employee badge, no radio orders or sideways glances. She was the one who dictated the pace, the choices, the concept of each piece. Her collection had a name: Washed Fragments. They were dresses inspired by fabrics that had survived stains and cuts, transformed into beauty and strength, a living metaphor for her own journey. Backstage at the event, Clara met designers from other states, heard sincere compliments and even invitations for future collaborations. It was a new world, and she walked through it without having to lower her head. But one night during rehearsals, while she was reviewing adjustments to one of the main dresses, she heard her name being called cautiously. She turned around, and there was Ethan. No bodyguards, no flashes, no rush. Just him. Thinner, more serious, his eyes deeply marked by everything he hadn't said in the last few years. Clara felt her heart beat differently, but she didn't move. He approached slowly. I didn't come for myself. I came because I needed to see with my own eyes what you've built without me. His voice was low, almost broken. I thought I'd forgotten you, but every time I see your name grow, I remember how small I was. She remained silent, not out of weakness, but by choice. And Ethan continued, I don't want anything. I don't deserve anything. I just needed to tell you that the whole world needs to see what you do, and that I was one of those who almost extinguished that light. For a second, time stood still. The Clara who had suffered, who cried alone on the bus with a backpack on. Her back now looked into the eyes of a man who carried his own ruin, and with serene tenderness she replied, Maybe you didn't erase me, but you certainly pushed me into the darkness, and it was there that I learned to shine alone. There was no anger, only truth. Ethan just nodded, and before leaving he left a card with a name engraved in discreet letters. If you ever want help expanding, I have contacts, but this time, you lead everything. And he left without looking back. That night, Clara cried, not for him, but for herself, for everything that survived inside her, for everything she rebuilt with thread, pain, and courage, and for knowing, finally, that the woman who sewed in the laundry was now sewing destinies. The Chicago show was more than a success. It was a public rebirth. The lights on the runway illuminated not only Clara's creations, but also the story behind each one. There was raw emotion in the audience's reactions. Some people cried without knowing why. Others applauded as if they had known her forever. Journalists wanted interviews. Fashion students approached her to ask her how she thought about the cuts, how she chose the fabrics, how she found beauty in what had already been discarded. And Clara, with the calm of someone who has faced more than just cameras, answered simply, I just sew what life has given me. On the flight back, holding her mother's hand as she slept next to her, Clara looked out the window and smiled with moist eyes. She was tired, but whole. She felt that something new was beginning. And indeed it was. When she landed, she found a formal invitation from the foundation that promotes social events focused on inclusion and the recovery of female talents. They wanted Clara to lead a new project, teaching women in vulnerable situations to sew, with technique, with art, with autonomy. It was more than just a job. It was the chance to give back to the world what she herself had almost lost. Hope. Without thinking twice, she accepted. She created workshops, rented a simple space with donated machines and started with 5 students. But before long, there were already 20. Women broken by time, hunger, and violence. And each of them found in Clara a silent guide, living proof that it is possible to remake one's own fabric. Little by little, the studio began to house stories, not just pieces. Dresses that carried names, pain, memories, and above all, new beginnings. On the other side of the city, Ethan watched everything from afar. He didn't dare interfere, but he kept watching. He had invested in some brands, made discreet moves to stay relevant. But his life now seemed smaller, not because of scarcity, but because of awareness. He knew that Clara's greatness was not on the stage, but in the silence she filled with dignity. And that, he would never have. One Saturday morning, Clara was invited to a local TV show. She told part of her story. She didn't talk about Ethan or the hotel. She talked about the laundry, her mother, her first fitted dress, and the strength she discovered on days when everything seemed lost. The presenter, moved, concluded by saying, "You are proof that the most fragile threads, when well joined, become armor." And in that sentence, Clara felt everything she needed. She was no longer remembered as the girl from the laundry. She was a reference. She was a name. She was a path. And above all, she was the woman who, even though she had been forgotten by, those who kissed her in the shadows now shone under the light of her own choice. The following months cemented Clara's name as a symbol of resilience. Her social studio grew, gained sponsorships, institutional support, and even a small traveling exhibition called Seams That Speak. The pieces, made by her and her students, traveled to cultural centers around the country with hand-embroidered messages, phrases of overcoming, dates of new beginnings, names of women who dared to believe again. Clara went to each inauguration, not to show off, but to give thanks. And in each new face she met, she recognized fragments of herself. One of these exhibitions took Clara to New York. There, during an inclusive fashion event, she presented her new collection made entirely from fabrics discarded by big brands. The idea was clear: to transform excess into essence. At the end of the show, a journalist approached her. "You know you're inspiring a movement, don't you? Today, many people want to be like you." Clara smiled sweetly and replied, "They don't have to be like me. They just have to not give up on themselves." In the audience at that event, sitting discreetly in the last row, Ethan watched everything. He wasn't announced. He didn't try to make contact, he just observed. When Clara came up on stage to say thank you, he lowered his head, holding the brooch he had in his pocket. It was a small piece made by one of the students from Clara's project, bought by him online, with the name of her brand engraved on the back. It was all that was left to play since time, and his lack of courage, took the rest. Backstage, after the performance, an elegant woman approached Clara. She had gray hair, a firm posture, and attentive eyes. She introduced herself as the director of an international foundation for arts and social impact. She said she had been following her work for months and wanted to include her in a global initiative for women changemakers. The project would offer grants for expansion, travel, and an artistic residency in Paris. Clara was silent for a moment. She looked around. She remembered her mother smiling at her when she was a child, her first basket of sheets, the shame she had felt in that hallway where Ethan had avoided her. She remembered it all, and suddenly, it all made sense. It wasn't luck. It was justice. She accepted the invitation. At home, when she told her mother, the two hugged for a long time. "You go so far, daughter," her mother said, with tears in her eyes. "But you always come back with more of yourself." And it was true. Clara was no longer a story of pain. It was a narrative of courage, and not even the most silent past could erase the present that she had sewn together so firmly. That night, alone in her room, Clara wrote a letter, not to send, but to release. It was addressed to Ethan. There was no rancor in it. Just words like, "Thank you," "Lesson," "I survived." She kept the letter in a wooden box where she kept her first paper templates, because some pain doesn't need to be returned, only transformed. The arrival in Paris was quiet and gentle, like Clara herself. No grand reception, no spotlights, just a simple key, a window overlooking a cobblestone street, and a small studio waiting for her hands. The international project brought together women from all over the world, refugees who learned to embroider as a way to heal trauma, widows who found companionship in sewing that life had taken away, young survivors of war, abuse, and oblivion. Clara listened to them with respect, and in each story, she recognized her own strength echoing in other languages, in other tones. In the early days, she would walk the streets early in the morning, looking at shop windows, listening to the sound of fountains, smelling the city's scents. She didn't seek inspiration. She let it find her. At night, she would sit alone in front of her sewing machine, with the fabrics she had brought in her suitcase and a sketchbook where she would jot down memories, ideas, and feelings. She didn't make plans. She was present. One afternoon, while visiting a bookstore, she came across a book of photographs of old exhibitions. She was leafing through it attentively when she stopped at an image, a model wearing an old dress from a fashion show that had taken place years before. She recognized the fabric. It was hers, one of the first. In the caption, the name Clara appeared without a surname, just Clara, and she smiled because she knew that was enough. She was already recognizable, for the way she sewed feelings, for the elegance that could not be bought. In the third week, she organized a workshop with the women involved in the project. She asked each of them to bring a piece of fabric with a story behind it. Pieces of a wedding veil, blood-stained blouses, handkerchiefs inherited from deceased mothers. Together they sewed a single dress made of pain, longing, and courage. In the end, they hung it on a white wall with the word, "We are reborn," written in several languages. The exhibition became a symbol. Visitors cried in front of the piece without knowing why. Clara did not explain. She just watched. Meanwhile, back home in the United States, the hotel empire began to crumble. Allegations, mismanagement, and debts piled up. Ethan's father died suddenly, leaving an inheritance full of problems. Ethan's wife filed for divorce and exposed some of his failings in the media. In a short time, he went from being a promising heir to a name shrouded in discreet scandals. There were no partners left, only silence. And in that vacuum, Clara's name echoed like a subtle reminder, not out of revenge, but as inevitable justice. Ethan, broken, opened an old box in his empty house. Inside, he found the shirt he had worn the night of the kiss. It still held the scent of fabric softener. He ran his hand over it as if touching a memory and whispered, "She saw me when I didn't even see myself." For the first time in years, he truly cried, not out of longing, but out of regret, and he knew it was too late. Clara, on the other side of the ocean, had no idea. She didn't need to know, because her story was already following another path, a path that no longer needed to be confirmed by anyone. The invitation arrived by email, with a discreet sender and no fanfare. The International Textile Art Biennial, one of the most prestigious events in the world of conceptual fashion. They wanted to close the show with the presentation of the collective piece made by Clara and her students in Paris. The work would be the closing symbol of that year's edition. But there was one detail that changed everything. The event would take place in New York, in the same convention center where, years before, Ethan had been honored as Young Entrepreneur of the Year. The stage where he celebrated empty achievements would now be the stage where Clara would put her soul in fabric before the world. She accepted, not to prove anything, but because she felt that the cycle needed to be closed gently and firmly, like a well-placed final stitch in a long seam. The trip was peaceful. Her hands didn't shake. Her eyes didn't search for ghosts. The day before the event, she visited the space alone. She walked down the marble corridor that she could only pass through as a visitor. Now, her name was at the top of the official program. Clara, Voices of the Invisible. On the day of the presentation, the auditorium was packed. The main piece, the collective dress made with embroidered stories, was unveiled under low lighting and respectful silence. When the spotlights came on, Clara went on stage with a microphone in her hand, but she didn't talk about the past. She spoke about what she had learned. Sewing is bringing together broken parts. It's not erasing what hurt. It's showing that even what was torn can be useful. It can shine. It can teach. The audience stood up. Long applause, discreet tears. Cameras recording everything. From the back of the auditorium, unseen, Ethan watched. He was no longer the man he had been before. He was there uninvited, unnoticed, dressed simply, almost unrecognizable. He had gone on impulse, not knowing what to expect. When he saw Clara on stage, he felt it all come back, the hidden kiss, the shame, the silence. But most of all, he felt her greatness crushing what was left of his pride in his chest. When the event ended, Clara walked through the halls of the convention center, greeting artists, being approached by students giving genuine smiles. And then, as she turned a corner, she saw him, sitting on a bench with a tired look, holding in his hands the same shirt from years ago, now carefully folded. She stopped for a moment. He saw her. He stood up slowly, as if time weighed on his shoulders. He said nothing. He just held out the shirt. Clara looked at the fabric for several seconds. Then, kindly, she took the piece and folded it perfectly. Just like she used to do. She handed it back to him and simply said, "Some things can't be washed, but we learn to keep them clean inside." Ethan smiled sadly and looked down. She touched his shoulder, light as a breeze, and she left. As she left, the night sky opened up into stars. Clara took a deep breath and walked slowly down the sidewalk, without haste, without anguish. For the first time, there was no weight. Love hurt, yes, but it didn't hurt anymore. It was just memory. And she, now, was a presence. She was a name. She was a woman. In the window of a random store, he saw his reflection and stopped. He looked at himself completely. He recognized what he had become. Someone who had learned to walk without turning around. And she continued with firm steps to her next destination, wherever courage took her. If this story touched your heart, leave your like so that more people know the strength of those who are reborn in silence. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming exciting stories. And tell me here in the comments, have you also learned to walk without turning around? Now click on the video that is appearing on your screen. It tells another story of overcoming that will give you goosebumps until the last scene. Watch it now. It's unmissable.